May God bless your day and your week as you join us today. Welcome to our deep dive. We have a truly profound mission ahead of us today.
We really do.
Yeah, we are taking a comprehensive deep dive into Matthew chapter 26. And to do this justice, we are drawing on the rich historical, cultural, and theological bedrock of the Holman and NAA Study Bibles.
Right. Those are incredible resources.
Exactly. We're going to rely on those two sources throughout our conversation today to basically strip away the centuries and put you, the listener, right in the room.
It's really great to be here to unpack this with you. This specific chapter is essentially the pressure cooker of the ancient world.
Yeah, pressure cooker is the perfect way to describe it.
I mean, everything that has been building up over the previous chapters finally reaches this boiling point. And the historical context reveals so many layers of strategy and failure and devotion that we normally just read right past it.
We do. We skip the details. But we aren't looking at a dry historical timeline today. We are dropping you into an intense, incredibly fast-paced drama. It is overflowing with backdoor political maneuvering, calculated betrayals, and on the flip side, moments of absolute agonizing devotion. At its core, this is a masterclass in understanding how humanity reacts to ultimate pressure.
And to really grasp that pressure, you have to mentally step into Jerusalem during Passover.
Set the scene for us.
Well, you already know the basic history of the festival, remembering the liberation from Egypt. But think about the sheer logistics of this moment. The city is essentially a fortress, and right now its population has exponentially exploded with religious pilgrims from all over the known world.
Just massive crowds everywhere.
Everywhere. The atmosphere isn't just festive, it is electric, and it's dangerously volatile. The Roman military is heavily armed, they're on high alert, and they are watching every single alleyway.
Because they know what could happen.
Exactly. This is exactly the kind of nationalist gathering that historically sparks violent rebellions.
Right. And meanwhile, the local religious leaders are sweating bullets. They are absolutely desperate to maintain their fragile grip on the population without triggering a Roman crackdown. Which brings us right into our first scene. We start with a conspiracy.
What's fascinating here is the cold calculation of the political elite. The chief priests and elders are holding this clandestine, off-the-books meeting at the palace of Caiaphas.
The high priest.
Right. Now, Caiaphas is a brilliant, ruthless survivor. He actually served as high priest from 18 to 36 A.D.
Which is a remarkably long time for that era, isn't it?
Very long. It means he knew exactly how to navigate Roman occupation to keep his status and his power. So they are actively plotting to arrest Jesus by stealth and execute him.
But they're hesitating.
Yes. And their primary hesitation isn't a theological debate, it is crowd control. They are terrified of a riot.
Because of the Romans.
Precisely. If that volatile Passover crowd turns into a mob, the Roman military will intervene with brutal, indiscriminate force, and Caiaphas loses his seat.
Picture yourself in Caiaphas's shoes for a second. You are trying to manage a literal powder keg. And this rogue rabbi from Galilee is walking around with enough popular support to light the match.
The political nightmare for them.
So they decide to bide their time.
Yeah.
But then the narrative gives us this sharp, brilliant cinematic cut. We leave the dark, calculating halls of political power and jump to a town called Bethany.
A total shift in tone.
Completely. Jesus is having dinner at the house of Simon the leper.
Yeah.
And just that name alone carries so much social weight.
Absolutely it does. By law, lepers were forced to live in complete isolation due to ritual impurity and the very real threat of contagion.
Right.
For Jesus to be reclining at a dinner table in Simon's home strongly implies this is a man Jesus had personally healed, radically restoring him to his community. It is a room just filled with gratitude.
Okay, let's unpack this, because right in the middle of this dinner, a woman approaches Jesus, and based on the broader historical context in our study Bibles, we know this is Mary, the sister of Martha and Lazarus.
Yeah.
She brings an alabaster flask filled with pure nard, which is an incredibly expensive perfume, and she pours it out over him.
And we really have to quantify just how extravagant this is to understand the reaction in the room. This specific perfume was worth roughly 300 denarii.
Which translates to what in that economy?
Well, in the first century economy, a single denarius was the standard daily wage for a laborer. So do the math we were talking about. Roughly an entire year's salary contained in one fragile flask, and she shatters it. She pours it out in an instant.
Think about what that means in modern terms. I mean, imagine cashing out your entire annual salary, every dime you made this year, and destroying it in one single unrecoverable gesture of devotion.
It is staggering.
It's no wonder the disciples lose their minds. The text specifically highlights Judas here, and they are absolutely indignant. They call it a massive waste. They argue it should have been liquidated and the funds given to the poor.
It is the voice of harsh pragmatism trying to shout down an act of pure worship, but Jesus immediately steps in and defends her.
He shuts them down.
He does. He rebukes the disciples, stating that she is preparing his body for burial. He is recognizing the reality of what is about to happen in Jerusalem. He even declares that wherever the gospel is preached globally, her act of devotion will be remembered.
As you listen to this, I really want you to contrast these two scenes. On one side of the city, you have the religious elites desperately calculating how to hold onto their power and violently eliminate a threat.
Cold and calculated.
Exactly. And on the other side, you have this woman completely surrendering an object of immense financial security in an act of totally uncalculated, reckless devotion. It makes you ask where you fall on that spectrum.
It is a mirror that reflects the deepest parts of human nature. And unfortunately, that contrast takes a much darker turn when we follow the disciple who is complaining the loudest about the cost of that perfume.
Yes, Judas. He makes a chilling pivot right after this dinner. He leaves Bethany, goes straight to the chief priests, and offers to sell Jesus out.
Just incredible betrayal.
And here's where I want to push on the details a bit. They agree on 30 pieces of silver. If Judas is just a greedy pragmatist looking for a payday, why settle on that specific amount? Why not haggle for more?
That is the crucial question, and the answer is deeply unsettling. Economically, 30 pieces of silver equates to about 120 days of wages.
So it's not even close to the value of the perfume.
Not even close. It's a fraction of what Mary's perfume was worth. But the cultural and legal significance is what really matters here. If you look back at ancient Jewish law in the book of Exodus, 30 pieces of silver was the exact, standardized legal compensation paid to a master if his slave was gored to death by an ox.
Hold on, so he is intentionally pricing him at the lowest possible human value. That's not just betrayal, that is a calculated insult.
Precisely. By accepting that specific amount, Judas is signaling his complete and utter contempt for his rabbi. He is legally and symbolically valuing the life of Jesus at the exact price of a dead slave.
Wow. That changes the entire tone of the story. It sets this incredibly heavy, sorrowful atmosphere as we move into the upper room for the Last Supper.
It hangs over the whole meal.
They sit down for the Passover meal, and right out of the gate, Jesus drops a bombshell. He looks around the table and predicts that one of them is going to betray him, identifying the man as he who dips his hand with me.
And in the middle of the shock and the defensive arguments breaking out around the table, Jesus does something profoundly revolutionary.
With the bread and the wine.
Right. You have to remember, for centuries, the Passover elements were the definitive, untouchable symbols of the Jewish faith, remembering the haste of the Exodus from Egypt with the unleavened bread. Jesus takes these ancient, sacred symbols and audaciously redefines them around himself.
He takes the bread and says, "This is my body." Then he takes the cup. What is the significance of shifting the meaning of the cup right at this specific moment?
Well, he takes the traditional cup of wine, the cup of redemption, and says it represents the blood of the new covenant, a promise of the forgiveness of sins. He is directly fulfilling massive Old Testament prophecies here.
A completely new paradigm.
He is telling these men that the ultimate liberation they've been waiting for isn't a political liberation from Rome. It is a spiritual liberation from sin itself. And it is going to be achieved through his impending sacrifice.
Here's where it gets really interesting. After the meal, the tension is just suffocating. They sing a hymn and walk out into the dark, heading toward the Mount of Olives, to a specific garden called Gethsemane.
Even the location is a profound physical metaphor.
How so?
The word Gethsemane literally translates to oil press. It was an olive grove where massive stone weights were used to ruthlessly crush olives to extract their oil. The text is giving us a sensory description of what Jesus is experiencing emotionally and spiritually.
He's being crushed.
He is being crushed under an unimaginable weight, telling his disciples his soul is sorrowful even to death.
He falls on his face and prays a deeply vulnerable prayer. He says, "Let this cup pass from me." Now, we just talked about the cup at the Last Supper, but this cup feels entirely different.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to look at how the prophets use that imagery. When Jesus asks for this cup to pass, he isn't merely expressing a human fear of physical torture, as horrific as a Roman crucifixion would be.
Right, it's deeper than that.
Much deeper. Throughout the Old Testament, a cup is frequently used as a terrifying symbol of God's divine wrath and absolute judgment against human rebellion.
So he is staring down the reality of absorbing the totality of that cosmic judgment.
Yes, he is facing the terrifying prospect of ultimate spiritual alienation from God the Father. It is a psychological and spiritual agony that breaks the human mind to even contemplate.
And while he is fighting this agonizing, entirely isolated battle in the dirt, what are his inner circle doing? Peter, James, and John
They fall asleep.
fall asleep. Not just once, but 3 times. I mean, we've all had moments where we've failed to show up for a friend, but falling asleep 3 times while your best friend is sweating blood and facing an apocalyptic spiritual crisis is a whole new level of missing the mark. The text simply notes their eyes were heavy.
It is a tragic testament to the limits of humanity. The spirit might be willing, but the flesh is incredibly weak. It perfectly illustrates that Jesus has to face this gauntlet entirely alone.
And the isolation ends violently. Suddenly the mob arrives. Judas leads a heavily armed crowd of temple guards and Roman soldiers right to Jesus in the dark. And of all the ways to identify him in the chaos, Judas uses a kiss.
Which was so standard back then.
Right, in that culture, a kiss was a standard greeting of deep respect, affection, and profound intimacy. To twist that specific gesture into a tactical weapon is deeply chilling.
It is the ultimate perversion of friendship. And when you dig into the original language here, there is a specific Greek word used heavily throughout these passages. The word is paradidomi.
Paradidomi, what does that mean exactly?
It literally translates to hand over or betray. The repetition of paradidomi emphasizes the theology of the moment. Jesus isn't just being arrested by a local militia. He's being handed over to the authorities, handed over to his enemies, and ultimately handed over to death.
Naturally, chaos erupts. One of the disciples in other historical accounts confirm its horrors. Peter pulls out a sword, swings wildly in the dark, and severs the ear of the high priest's servant Malchus.
And Jesus immediately shuts the violence down.
It's a moment of staggering, almost incomprehensible restraint. He commands Peter to put the sword away. And then he says something that stops everyone in their tracks. He says that if he wanted to, he could appeal to his Father and instantly be provided with more than 12 legions of angels.
Let's do the math on that because the scale is absolutely breathtaking.
Please do.
In the Roman military structure of the 1st century, a full combat-ready legion consisted of 6,000 soldiers. So when Jesus says 12 legions, he is talking about an army of 72,000 angels.
72,000.
Yes. And in biblical literature, a single angel is a being of terrifying, overwhelming power. To summon 72,000 of them wouldn't just be a rescue mission, it would be an apocalyptic force. It would mean the instantaneous annihilation of the mob, the city of Jerusalem, the Roman Empire, all of it.
Yeah. He has the nuclear code in his hand, and he refuses to use it. He exhibits absolute, perfect restraint, choosing to submit to the scriptural prophecies instead of fighting back with supreme force. He allows himself to be bound and led away into the night.
Which brings us to the deeply flawed, chaotic trials that follow. Jesus is dragged in the middle of the night to the Sanhedrin, the supreme religious and legal council of the Jewish people.
It's a complete kangaroo court, right?
Entirely. The historical context makes it clear that nighttime trials for capital offenses were highly irregular and legally invalid under Jewish law.
They're breaking their own rules.
Right from the start, the council is scrambling, desperately trying to construct a charge that will hold up under Roman scrutiny. They bring in a parade of false witnesses, but the testimonies are a mess. They completely contradict each other.
Finally, Caiaphas the high priest loses his patience. He steps up and demands an answer under a binding oath. He says, "I adjure you by the living God. Tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God." And for the first time, Jesus breaks his silence.
And his response leaves no room for misinterpretation. He quotes directly from 2 major Old Testament texts. He pulls from the apocalyptic visions in the book of Daniel and the royal coronation in the Psalms.
What does he say?
He says, "From now on, you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." By using those specific, highly charged titles and imagery, Jesus is making an undeniable claim to absolute divine authority. The verdict is sealed right there in the room.
The trial is over at that point. But while this grand, dramatic confrontation is happening inside the halls of power, we have to look at what is happening outside in the cold courtyard. The narrative violently shifts back to Peter.
The contrast is heartbreaking.
It really is. Just hours earlier, Peter had boldly sworn that he would die for Jesus, that even if everyone else ran, he would stand firm. But now, warming himself by a fire in enemy territory, he is completely undone. And not by a Roman interrogator or a powerful priest, but by a servant girl who simply asks if he was with the Galilean.
And Peter denies it. Then he moves to the gateway, and another girl points him out. And this is where the sociolinguistic details really bring the history to life. The bystanders recognize him because of his accent. They actually say, "Your speech betrays you."
How distinct was this accent? Why does it give him away so easily in a crowd?
Well, Peter was from Galilee, up in the north. The linguistics of the time show us that Galileans spoke with a very distinct, heavily accented dialect of Aramaic. They often swallowed their guttural letters, making it impossible to hide in a crowd of Judeans.
So he literally couldn't blend in once he started talking.
Exactly. Furthermore, the wealthy, highly educated Judeans in Jerusalem often looked down on Galileans as uncultured or uneducated. So the moment Peter opens his mouth, his identity and his social class are broadcasted to everyone around the fire.
He's cornered. And under that intense claustrophobic pressure, Peter completely breaks. He begins to invoke curses and swear formal oaths, aggressively denying that he ever even laid eyes on Jesus. And the second he does it for the third time, the rooster crows.
Just as Jesus predicted.
All the bravado vanishes. Peter realizes exactly what he's done, stumbles out of the courtyard, and weeps bitterly.
When you look at the totality of this chapter, it raises an important question for all of us. We are watching everyone in this narrative operate under the most intense pressure imaginable. And in that crucible, their true character is completely exposed.
So what does this all mean for you listening today? When you step back and look at the entire deep dive, Matthew 26 is truly a stunning portrait of control versus surrender.
It really is.
Think about the players we've analyzed. Almost everyone around Jesus is frantically, desperately grasping for control. Caiaphas is manipulating the legal system to protect his political status. Judas is grasping for financial control, trying to force a specific outcome with 30 pieces of silver.
Even
Peter's grasping for control, first by swinging a sword in the dark, and then by lying through his teeth to save his own skin.
Yet in the dead center of all this frantic chaos, you have Jesus. He is the only individual in the story who possesses actual ultimate power, the power to call down 72,000 angels in a heartbeat. Yet he is the only one who completely surrenders his control.
Perfectly surrendered.
He perfectly submits his will to God the Father, even when it means walking directly into the crushing, suffocating pressure of the oil press.
It's a profound challenge to our own instincts when we are under pressure. Do we grasp for control or do we surrender? As we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over on your own.
Consider the tragic irony of the climax of the trial we discussed. When Jesus claims his divine authority, Caiaphas, the high priest, reacts with an explosive display of righteous fury. To demonstrate his outrage at the supposed blasphemy, he forcefully tears his sacred garment.
Right, a massive display of grief.
But here is the devastating historical reality. According to strict Jewish law, specifically in the book of Leviticus, the high priest was explicitly forbidden from ever tearing his priestly robes under any circumstances whatsoever.
So he broke the law right then and there.
Yes. In his desperate rush to condemn Jesus for supposedly violating God's law, the high priest overtly violated the very law he claimed to be protecting. He was so blinded by his need to maintain control that he entirely missed the fact that the true ultimate high priest was standing right in front of him.
What a staggering note to end on. Thank you for joining us on this journey. We say goodbye to you today by saying that God blesses all the listeners. Until next time.